Hey, 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 everybody. Let's make sure we're all good here. Welcome to the live show. An hour earlier, so I'm anticipating that some people did not get the word or didn't see that. And so we'll see how long it takes for folks to catch up and join us today live. Yes, I am in full Hawaiian regalia here. So we are good to go. As far as that goes, welcome to the show and thanks for being here with me. Let me go ahead and, as usual, before I do anything else, let's go ahead and get the Q&A section put up here. Please post your questions here. And you will see a little place in the comment box, I think at the top or something, to post your Q&A questions for me for this week. You can start throwing them in there right now. I'm going to throw this up, the little question box there, so that I can see them as they come in and throw them up on the screen as we go. So let's also flip over so we can see y'all's chat comments as we go. There we are. And things are great. In fact, I am in such a good mood right now for a lot of reasons around my work and things that have happened this week. And work I got to do off camera. I cannot, let me just start the show by saying that I cannot express in words how powerful it is to my life, and hopefully to yours, it could be too, that the power of helping people. There just aren't words for that sort of warm, fuzzy feeling that you get when you make a positive difference in somebody else's life. Somebody sent me an email today from the podcast that I posted yesterday that was, it literally said, thank you for giving me my life back. And I was like, wow, I want my work to help. But when people come back with feedback like that, it is heartwarming and a little overwhelming and a little and very, very joyful to me to be able to help people that way. So that's what I'm all about, and working, with the Aftermath Foundation, and answering the phones and helping people in peer support. That's the best term for for that. Y'all have seen that Phil Jones is now the president, and I've been working with him, and anyway, there's just the Aftermath has all kinds of good stuff going on. Speaking of, that's why we moved the show up an hour, because one of the things the Aftermath has going is that they are going to be doing a live show. Claire Headley and Phil will be talking about Aftermath stuff, and they're going to be doing that at 2 o'clock, and I did not want to run into the middle of that, so I moved it up because we classically tend to go, it's not because I'm trying to time this show for like 90 minutes to 2 hours. It's just so many questions come in from you guys, and they're all so good, and it's so fun, and I just really enjoy this time with you. So that's why I thought that I'd move it up so that we don't cross streams. Don't cross the streams. And that way y'all could do this show and then go over to see what the Aftermath has for you. So good times there. Let us go ahead and do our Benson cam for this week. Here is our little bundle of furry joy. Now, this is actually a little older Benson cam, but this is exactly, and I mean exactly, what he looks like right now. If I had taken video today, it would have looked exactly like this. He is... my wife and I actually talk to each other all the time during the week. We cannot deal with how cute our dog is. We just can't deal with it. It is just, when he wants something, when he comes up on you, when he is doing this exact thing right here, it is It's an unstoppable force. We will do anything for our little bundle of furry joy. There is no question about it. The guy is we just love him to death. He is such a little cutie. So there's your there's your Benson cam for this week. Let's pop back over to the chat screen here. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit. You know how I tend to do a little bit of a monologue right now before we get into your questions. I can see some questions coming up on the screen, and please feel free, even if you're newly here or or been around for a while and haven't thrown questions my way, feel free to throw me anything you want. Maybe I'll tell you, no, I'm not going to get into that. But very rarely does that happen. I'm a pretty open book here, and I like talking to you guys and filling you in on stuff. So feel free to throw anything at me, and let's see what happens. I wanted to... I wanted to highlight, boldface, underline, italicize, point all the neon signs at my podcast from yesterday. The Speaking of Cults podcast is something I post every Saturday. And mostly we are, speaking of cults. It's always around some kind of theme having to do with cult stuff. And by the way, I am scheduling up another show with my ex-Mormon friends, Shannon and Bryce. And we're gonna record. Their availability is sometimes they go offline for a while and come back, and so we'll be shooting in a few weeks. So you will be getting another Mormon-themed Speaking of Cults podcast soon. And I post interviews, and I talk with professionals, or I talk with ex-members, or maybe I put together some kind of monologue podcast, which is what I did this week. And I decided to go official. I decided to make it like a real thing and go, okay, let's do this. I have a model that I have put together of human behavior, of how and why people act the way that they do. It's taken me years and years of study and research and work and interviewing and thinking and writing and talking about human behavior and the psychology of emotion and identity and obviously behavioral psychology. I don't pretend to be more than I am, or be higher educated than I am, but I study and research and talk a lot to people who know what they're talking about, and I'm a keen student of people. I have been for a real long time, and being out of Scientology for 12 years, as I've said before, the first question that comes to mind, or that drove me for many, many years after leaving Scientology was, like all cult members who leave or escape, a lot of us ponder, what the hell happened to me? What was that? What occurred? And most importantly, how do I make sure it doesn't happen to me again? And that was what got me into critical thinking right away. Speaking of, do not let me forget my critical thinking cards today. Really want to highlight the importance of critical thinking. That's what got me on this whole journey. And that, I thought critical thinking was going to be all there was. That was the answer, and everybody just needed to learn critical thinking and we'd all be fine. Well, maybe not so much. And I'm not going to go into a whole huge long diatribe here today on this, but I want y'all to have the background on this, and I want you to understand where I'm coming from. So years and years of work, and I created this YouTube channel to document that journey, that path out of Scientology, recovering from the experience, learning, growing, progressing, moving on, dropping the bullshit, dropping the language, dropping the cult habits and the thought processes and action patterns, as they say, and all the stuff that the cult indoctrinates you in. And we compared it to onion layers, which is a great analogy for stripping away layer after layer after layer of what the cult lays on top of you so that you get down to, back to who you are. And yet there were always these barriers and walls that I was running into. And so after figuring out what happened to me and what was done and how you come to a place also along that line where you also see that there's a codependency that you're contributing to the situation too. Not necessarily day one stuff on a recovery path. You don't, point the finger of responsibility back at the victim and go, well, it was all your fault, because it wasn't all their fault and it never is. But yet we contribute to it as cult members and we feed into it. And it's not just stuff that's done to us. We end up, sometimes victimizing ourselves and victimizing other people as part of the experience. And there's reconciling that and coming to some degree of, responsibility and ownership for all of it. And having a proper perspective on what that means. And I think that's all part of that recovery thing. But then after that was sort of achieved or done or kind of figured out, like, okay, I get it. I get what was done. I get the layers of control and the thought reform and the nonsense that Hubbard gets up to. And we've gone all the way down the Hubbard rabbit hole, all the way down on this channel. I mean, we figured that guy out. So that's good work to do. And that's very, very, for me, and I think for a lot of you, it's very cathartic. It's very healing, it's very, yeah, you can let some of that shit go. But the other thing that's been driving me for years now, is once you kind of figure out the cult stuff, you realize there's other things going on. I've talked openly to you guys about, ADHD and depression and anxiety and these and trauma stuff, complex PTSD. That was something I had to work through. So there's other things going on than just cult indoctrination. It's not just learning a bunch of horrible stuff or thinking Xenu is real. You can shed that stuff pretty quick, but this other stuff, it's like multi-layered, right? There's a lot going on. We're complicated creatures, human beings are. We have complicated noggins, So I wanted to figure out, and for years now, I've been pondering this question, just like I pondered the what the hell happened to me question. The next question was, why do people act the way they do? What is it about people that makes them hypocritical and selfish and unreasonable and believe stupid things that are wholly irrational when you look at it from a distance, but when you're in it, you can't see it, right? And what is that? And not just what drives irrationality, but what drives the good stuff too. Why do we do good things? Why do some of us go out of our way to try to worry and fret and gnash our teeth about the survival or well-being of other people? What's that about too? Because sometimes that can go, I'm not going to say you can be toxically empathetic, but you can take it a little bit too far in terms of how much of yourself you invest in other people at the cost of your own well-being. So I wanted to figure out all of that. It's just a small order, no big deal. It's only, something people have been pondering for centuries. I figured, why can't I take a stab at it, And for a long, long time, I've been sort of hinting at or telling you guys various things that have come up with as I've been going. I don't hold stuff back a lot when I'm here. I just kind of give it to you as to here's what's on my mind, here's what I'm thinking about, here's what I've recently learned, here's how it fits in with other stuff. And not every road leads to gold. Sometimes you go down a path and, I remember one time I went down this path of schemas, psychological schemas. And I thought that was really going to go somewhere. And it's probably interesting stuff. And maybe it could go further than I took it. But it was a little bit of a dead end for me. It didn't really open more doors. And so, you go back down and hit the main line again and keep going. And, and you go down the history of psychology. There's so many things that I've hit on that I thought was original thinking to me. And then, you do a little bit of research and then, they were figuring this stuff out 70, 80 years ago. William James, B.F. Skinner, some of these guys, they've been working on this stuff before I was even alive and asking the same kind of questions and coming up with some pretty interesting answers. Some good, some bad, some culturally relevant at the time, but culture changes. And so maybe those answers change a little bit. Or they go all in on certain things. I'm thinking again of Skinner and behavioralism, right? And how you can condition anybody to do anything if you start young enough, which is just not true. We're more complicated than that. You can't condition human beings the same way you condition dogs. We're not dogs. And so it doesn't work exactly the same way with us. That kind of thinking that was really prevalent in the 50s. But, you got to pursue that stuff. You got to go down those alleys and check that stuff out. And where it went was realizing that emotion, and it was really the tone scale video that I did and all the research. I did years, so much research. Delaying getting those videos done on the tone scale and the E-meter, if you all remember, right? They were my white whale until I finally caught them and got them done. And it was researching that stuff, though, that really gave me this very broad appreciation for emotional intelligence and the need to understand not just our emotional reactions in the moment, but the emotional needs that we all have. That we have these various categories or buckets of things that we need. We as human beings, we need community. Some of us need it a lot less than others. And some of us need it a lot more than others. But I don't think there's a single human being who can get along without some sense of community. There's ego, self, a sense of self. You can't just be selfless as a human being. It's impossible. You are an individual in a hive tribal, species. So we have this, sometimes overdeveloped sense of self or ego, and we have disordered people, some of whom we know and don't love so much, out there who are all about self-aggrandizement, and that's all they think about. That's their number one emotional need that they focus so much of their attention on. But we have those needs, and it was really surprising. The more I talked about that, the more people would come back with, I didn't even know I had emotional needs. And I'd be like, wow, this is really, really fundamental stuff that doesn't get communicated about enough. We don't understand ourselves. Or we create ideas that are simplistic or unrealistic or idealistic. Certainly nothing wrong with being idealistic, but when it's not realistic, these things can clash, right? And we can think of ourselves as more good or more evil or more endowed with, some divine spark or something. I don't know, than we are. I'm probably not using the right word when I say that, because I'm not trying to make some anti-religious statement there. But just this people are so good, sometimes, and you realize that these emotional needs are powerful forces in our lives, powerful. And they are subconscious. There's so many things going on under the hood that we don't even get to see the engine moving. We don't, there's so much in our brain happening that we have no conscious awareness of at all. You have no awareness right now at all of your brain running your lungs, running your liver, running your kidneys, digesting the food. There's a whole nervous system down here too that's also running that. You're not paying any attention to it at all. None. You have no attention on it, right? And it just happens. That's part of what your body is constantly doing. Well, it's also feeding you, right? At very, very low levels, at very, very basic levels, what's been called the lizard brain, which is not really an accurate statement, but people use it anyway because it makes sense. And it feeds you things that you have no conscious awareness of, and suddenly you feel certain ways. And it's all in the direction of feeding or fulfilling your emotional needs long term. That's the long term, sort of behavior, the motivation that drives our behavior. And then below that is your morality, which is right up against your identity. And I did a whole podcast about this week, and it was, and putting all of this together and deciding, okay, why not? Other people put out models. Why can't I? Why can't I just go, you know what? This is how people are. Because I haven't found any exceptions. I haven't found people who don't fit my REM model, right? Rationality or rationalization, right? Reason, rationalization, emotion, and morality. Simple, easy peasy, 3 things. And they're layered, right? And that's how we are motivated to act and behave. It's not a purely biological thing. It's just as much social hierarchies and social influence as it is individual will or motivation. Because we are not just individual creatures, we are social creatures, tribal, if you will. And so all of it comes together, and here's a way of explaining why we do what we do. So this week I decided to put that together as a podcast and throw it out there. And I was really, really excited to do that. And the feedback I've gotten so far has been really, really nice. And I hope that I'm not going to just leave it as that one and done. It's going to be a chapter in my book on cult recovery. I'm going to talk about this model, and I'm going to be doing more work with it. I'm going to talk with my university professor at some point about it, in terms of what should I do with that, sort of academically, if anything, and that kind of thing, right? But no one else, and I checked pretty thoroughly, no one else has put anything together like what I did. And I'm not trying to, this isn't a horn tooting thing. It's just wow, no one's ever put it together this way. It tends to be, and this was interesting to me, so it might be interesting to you, that, the idea of critical thinking and the idea of emotional intelligence and the idea of moral philosophy or moral foundations, if you read Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind, that there's a whole breakdown on a theory of moral foundations, which I agree with. Even if I don't agree with some of Jonathan Haidt's conclusions, I agree with the theory itself. It makes a lot of sense. And these 3 things are kind of siloed. No one's ever really gone, hey, you know what? You take this and you take this and you take this. That's how people act. They'll tend to silo on, well, he's a good or a bad critical thinker and we need to fix his critical thinking and then everything will be fine. Or, oh, the person has no awareness of their own emotions or emotional life, and so they have no emotional intelligence, and this is the thing that they are lacking, and they silo only on that behavior, that learning. And then, of course, there's morality, and morality you could easily use to explain the entire world and everybody in it, because everybody's operating on some kind of moral foundations. Everyone. There's no human being who doesn't have concepts, deep-rooted, deep identity, again, right up against your identity, powerful forces in our mind that tell us or feed us ideas of what's right and wrong and good and bad. It's that simple, right? We don't have to go down deep moral philosophy and dive into Nietzsche in order to understand the simple idea of what morality is. And these are all influences on us. And so that's what my model is. And I'm just going to, promote that because I think it explains a lot. And I think it can help people to understand themselves. And I think it can help people understand why people get in cults, why people go extreme, why people get radicalized, and how you can address that to bring them back so they're not so extreme in their thinking or their emotions or their morality. That's what I think, and I think that's what I've got to offer to the world, that is truly mine, that I've put together. So I hope you will check out that podcast from yesterday. Enough horn tooting. But I really wanted to. I'm proud of that work. I really am. So you're going to hear about it. I mean, if we can, the models at the same time, models are a dime a dozen, right? There's tons of models, like cults, for example. You have a bite model. You have Janja Lalich's bounded choice model. You have, something we studied on the coercive control program is we studied lots of different models of how cults could be described. And a model is not something that's trying to explain every little detail and every little nuance of every little situation. It's taking the chaos and confusion of our lives and our motivations and behavior and putting a framework or a template over it so you can go, oh, okay, so I can start sorting here and here and here, and it kind of makes sense. It makes things make more sense. And I think that's why Stephen Hassan's bite model has caught on so well all over, the cult world, is because it's simple, easy to understand, right? Behavior, information, thought, and emotion control, right? 4 things, boom, boom. We take anything a cult does, we can slot it into one of those categories, and there we go. And you can analyze a group against a bite model, sometimes well, sometimes not so well. It depends on the person doing the analysis. I've seen some pretty sloppy, goofy ones. And you can take it too far, like, okay, now I'm going to do the bite model on, the US government or something. And it's like, okay, that's not quite how cults work, is the US government. But, I get it, right? So people can misuse this stuff. You can't prevent that. But the idea is that you put something out there that's simple, that's easy to understand, and then people can get their head around easily, and then they can lead an easier life. They can have a better time of it, They can understand themselves better. And that's what that was all about. So there you go. That's me. That's my monologue for this week. Now let's go ahead and get into your questions, because I got a lot here and I love answering them. All right, let's go with the first one. Let me catch my breath here. Okay. Once a witness asks, Chris, do you think Trump will open Alcatraz and put illegal aliens there? I think that Stephen Miller and the Department of Homeland Security will be very keen to do things like that. Whether they open Alcatraz specifically or not, I don't know. But are they willing to put together concentration camp style setups or operations like they did in Florida? Yeah, they are. Are they willing to lock people up there in, fairly inhuman conditions because they don't like minorities or, however you want to put it, brown people, black people, foreign people, illegals, which is really the new vermin term, if you go back in propaganda land to how we, us versus them, each other. We use all kinds of nasty language to demean and diminish the humanity of other people. We're really, really, really good at that. We're very tribal as a species. This is, part of that whole picture. And so there are people in positions of power right now in the U.S. government who are keen, really, really excited about the idea of locking up anyone who isn't white. And Stephen Miller's at the top of that list, right? The guy is Himmler revisited. He is really, really, really not a good man. And he's leading the charge on this, right? And it's all around, the whole concept of it is around racial purity. It's around national purity. And Stephen Miller and the Department of Homeland Security and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement folks, the ICE people, are not, they don't think about and they don't care about the U.S. economy or your well-being. Right? They don't care, because there's also a whole classism thing going on there. They're at the top of the food chain, as they see it, of the class system in America. And so they never have to worry about not being at the top of that heap, they think. Authoritarians always think that. And so they are drunk on their own power. And this, of course, ties in directly with the Heritage Foundation and the Project 2025 folks who are on a religious crusade. And these factions of people have come together under Trump. Trump's populist post-truth rhetoric has enabled these groups to come up to power and be given more power than they ever should have been given. You know, and they abuse that power daily. And the courts have been trying to put some degree of stops on that. But then the court process system, as you all know, watching, you know, how we, you know, bumble through convicting or pursuing cults, you know, the justice system can be incredibly frustrating in this country. And when the Supreme Court is on the side of the authoritarians and Congress is on the side of the authoritarians, then you have a really toxic stew, which is what we have right now. So, so they are enabling. They have been enabled. The racists and the nationalists who think that this country should be a white Christian nationalist nation are the ones who have this power right now, and they're willing to do anything to keep that power and to suppress and oppress anyone that they want, who they see as un-American, at any cost, right? The economics be damned. Oh, these are the people who are literally supporting the service industry and the farm industry, food industry. We don't care. We don't care. That's their attitude. I mean, they tell you, it's right on TV, you know, they're straight up. We don't care, right? We'll just put Americans to work doing that, because they know that if they create depression-like conditions, if they think about it at all, you know, if they create depression-like conditions, then people will do anything for work and anything to stay alive. And Americans who right now are like, I would not do that kind of work. Well, you will if push comes to shove, right? And so that's the society they are totally down with creating. And so, so this whole get all the illegal aliens out of here is just phase one of this you know, master plan. And there's probably other things, you know, other irons in this fire as well that I'm not commenting on right now because I'm not going into a whole huge thing. But since you ask about it, you're gonna, you know, I'm gonna rant a little bit about some of this stuff because that's what's going on all around us right now. And it's on us to stop it, because all the Dems are doing is wagging their fingers at these guys. And that's not enough. So, so I'm supremely disappointed and upset with the Democratic Party right now that has got to be one of the most tone-deaf institutions in this country right now. There are individual Democrats who are speaking up and trying to push back on this in a positive way. I'm not saying all of them are horrible, but as an institution, the Democratic Party has got to wake the fuck up and stop being part of the problem, because this whole problem that I'm talking about right now was created by them too. So people always want me to be critical of the left. So there you go. I'm being critical of the left. All right. So there we go. Let's carry on here. OBG Foster, do you go to sci-fi conventions? The big Star Trek one is this week in Vegas. Oh, I wish I could. Yeah, just don't really have the time or money to do so. I have gone to sci-fi conventions. I've gone to a few of them. In fact, there was one I think the last time I went was here in Denver. It was a little disappointing. the one that was here a few years ago, it was a Star Trek kind of convention. My wife and I dressed up. We didn't do full on cosplay, but we had fun, going there and looking at all the merch and watching people play games and, checking out some of the props and talks that were given and stuff. But it was not, what I was hoping it would be. I'm pretty sure the one in Vegas is probably awesome, probably, Comic-Con level or something. But I don't really get out to those very much anymore to really get down to the brass tacks of answering your question. It's been a few years. Here's an interesting question. Young Matador. Hey, Chris, Wednesday marked the 50th anniversary of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. Do you remember the publicity about this? What are your own thoughts about where his body is, if it still exists? Okay. I'll just be brief and to the point on this one. Here's what I remember most about this is Geraldo Rivera thinking he had found the vault or location or something where Hoffa's body was. It was Hoffa, right? And it being a big nothing burger, right? Like they opened it up and there wasn't anything in there and it was kind of big egg on his face, which, as far as I'm concerned, Geraldo Rivera could, he's always got egg on his face. Anyway, I really don't know a lot about the actual facts around Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, but I do know an awful lot about the mafia in general and some of its history here in the United States. I have dived a little bit into that while studying and researching its parallels with the Church of Scientology. Structurally, the mafia and the Church of Scientology are very, very similar. I got a whole book outline on how similar they are. I mean, I'm literally got a book idea on how to write that book, right? So I kind of dived a little bit into that, and it's not exactly parallel, of course, but it's interesting structurally how it is. So anyway, so the mafia, especially in their heyday, were really, really good at disappearing people, and especially their own. So I remember a lot of publicity around it. It's very sensational, but it was at the same time it was a little flash in the pan, and who cares, right? So I don't know. That's not a super intelligent answer, but I have no idea where that guy's body is, and quite factually, it is probably not in a condition where it's even going to be found at this point. I mean, short of maybe some DNA evidence or something uncovering. I mean, if they found, a thumb or something, like I imagine his body is buried pretty deep somewhere, if not dissolved in acid or something. I mean, if you really want to professionally, that's another thing I've looked into, not because I want to, murder anybody, but like many people, I've gone way down the serial killer rabbit hole. I've read the books, I've watched documentaries. I really got my head around serial killers at one point. This is back when I was when I was leaving Scientology, when I was leaving the Sea Org, I was reading some stuff. Was it the Green River Killer and the guy up in Washington? It seems like there were a few of them up in Washington State for some reason, and that guy down in Texas, Ed something. Ugh. Anyway, I've definitely had, let's put it this way, I've had periods of hyper focus on serial killers, and so when you go down those rabbit holes, inevitably you start trying to think through, how would you get rid of a body so you wouldn't get caught, right? Don't tell me you haven't thought of that. And, and you start thinking of all the things. And then, of course, you watch shows like Breaking Bad where, they literally go get acid and Jesse's so stupid. He gets, he just, ends up putting a hole through his house floor, trying to get rid of a body. right? Trying to get rid of the evidence. So it's both easy if you know what you're doing and super, super hard if you don't have any idea what you're doing to get rid of a body. My point, really, right? And the mafia in its heyday definitely knew how to get rid of bodies. So I don't know that we're ever going to find Hoffa is all that long-windedness just to get to, I don't know if we're ever going to find him. Okay, let's move on. Once a witness. What do you about Trump? Okay, what do I think about Trump withholding money to universities? Will they become broke over time? No, universities could survive without government grants. They'll have to restructure. They'll have to rethink their model. But universities have existed for a long, 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 long time, and they didn't all exist or grow or develop because of government funding. Private funding, I think, outweighs government funding. I think, not 100% on that, and it probably depends on the different universities. But it does hurt. It will hamper their operations enough that I heard, what was it, Columbia or something, kowtowed to Trump's demands. Universities are places where you're supposed to have higher education. It shouldn't be bastions of political partisanship. A place of learning is a place where you're supposed to learn and potentially learn anything. Certainly learn the subject matter that the universities offer in an unpartisan, objective way. You could teach coercive control in an extremely partisan manner, or you could teach it in an objective manner. Just to talk about what I know about. How could you teach it in a partisan way? You only allow examples of coercive control on the political left or on the political right or on the religious zone or sphere of activity or in the secular world. You could do this. You could curve it. You could make it unobjective, right? And Trump's effort is to play to his populist base and maintain his populist position by continuing the culture war lines. I don't know, the things they say in the culture war about universities is that they are bastions of woke thinking. And sure enough, you will find in philosophy and in social sciences that there are topics and subject matter that you could consider woke, meaning they address human rights, racial minority inequality. There are subject matter studies you could do that address those concerns. They're real things that happen in the real world. But then you could say, that's all the university does. Well, that's just not true. And it never has been true, ever. But because culture war right now, especially here in the United States, is such a divided, partisan, civil war topic, Trump gets tons and tons of enabling, right? Tons and tons of popularity from his base and from the religious and political right, because he plays them with propaganda-like lines such as universities are bastions of woke thinking. And to the degree, now, that's the culture war side of it, and you brought up Trump, and so that's his motivation to withhold money and play his base on that is really he's coming from that place. In other words, Trump doesn't care about whether a university is woke or not. It doesn't matter to him. As a person, as an individual, And even as the president, he doesn't care because he's not a principled person and he's not operating on principles that way. He just wants to stay in power, and he wants to ride the ride of populism that put him where he is. And so he knows how to play his base, and he plays them with culture war. So that's his motivation to do this withholding money and demand subservience and loyalty from the universities. You bend the knee, or I'm not going to give you your money. So it's just pure blackmail. And Trump is really, really good at that because he learned from the best and has been doing it his whole life. He's really good at that, right? And so that's his game on that. So that all being said, right, at the same time, you do have an issue where some people in university have taken political leanings on the left too far, have become too outspoken about their partisanship from that angle, and have said or pushed agenda-based teaching in universities. That has happened, and none of us should sit here and say it hasn't, because it absolutely has. And that's what gets blown up. See, it has happened, but it hasn't happened to such a degree that they're woke bastions of nonsense, right? That's where it becomes propaganda. Yes, some people take their shit too far, and they should be corrected when they do that kind of thing, because universities should be objective places, halls of learning, right? So you take a small thing that happens here and here and here and here, and you blow it up to make it much, much bigger and much, much, much more of a problem than it really is. And that's what keeps the populist base. That's the red meat for the populist base, right? I think I've made the point. So, so there you go. Anyway, I won't keep pounding on that one. But no, they're not going to go broke. Not that way. Okay. Hey, hun. Hey, did you or anyone you know ever experience accusations of stolen valor when you were in public in the Sea Org uniform? Oh, yeah. Good, interesting question. No, I never heard of that. No, the only questions I would get is what branch of the service are you? I don't recognize that uniform. Where are you from? That would be the only thing I ever personally got. And when and a couple times when I was in my full Class A uniform, which looks like the kind of navy blue with the lanyard and the the sort of campaign bars and ribbons and stuff, right? It looks like you're some military guy. To the uneducated eye, they're all kind of the same. But to, military personnel or ex-military personnel, they immediately are like, what's that uniform? Because I ain't never seen anything like that before. Because the Sea Org, the faux military, right? So they would ask me about that. Once or twice I was offered military rates on food, stuff like that, veteran discount. And I would always say, no, I'm not a veteran, or active duty military. I'm not that, right? I wouldn't take that. But I knew some people who did in the Sea Org. But as far as stolen valor goes, no, nobody ever got in my face about that. And I never, ever heard, of anyone who that happened to. In fact, I'll tell you, I wasn't even aware of the concept of stolen valor until I left the Sea Org and started reading about L. Ron Hubbard's war record and what a pack of lies it is, right? And how the Church of Scientology has issued statements breaking down the ribbons and awards that L. Ron Hubbard supposedly earned, which, Purple Hearts and this and that and, all this bullshit. They just made shit up out of nowhere and said, this is Hubbard's war record. This is Hubbard's accomplishments. This is L. Ron Hubbard, the hero. And that is stolen valor. all kinds of stolen valor. And I had just never heard that term until I learned about L. Ron Hubbard's lies, and how the church double, triple, quadruple down on them, you know. And it was Chris Owen's work, you know, the historian who's been writing for years and years about Scientology, that really, you know, he really is the one who did the breakdowns on that authoritatively. So, yeah. Yes, Salvation Army isn't a real army. Exactly, and neither is the Sea Org. You know, such a joke. I mean, it's really, let me just tell you guys, from my position now, I look down on the Sea Org. That's a fun thing to say. I never really put it that way before, but I do. The Sea Org is a joke. It's a joke. I mean, the idea that these people have any authority, any knowledge, any objective reason to exist besides puffing themselves up and, you know, and having their own heads up their asses, there is no reason. None. They're not doing anything useful or helpful to people at a national or global level. They're just cosplaying. They're LARPing. Remember last week's questions about that. So, you know, fuck the Sea Org, you know? I mean, in that sense, you know, they're, you know, it's stretching the term stolen valor, but it's just pathetic, really, how puffed up they are on their own importance. And the help, and I'll say again, I've said this many times, the help that gets done in Scientology gets done despite Scientology, not because of it. Okay. John asks, what was the last concert you went to? Ooh. I think the last one I went to was a tribute band here in Denver. And I'm trying to remember, it was two. Not Rush. Journey? I think it was a Journey tribute band. I wish I'd seen Journey. I love Journey. Oh my God, do I love Journey. Great music. Great music. When back up Steve Perry days, Journey, right? That's my journey. Anyway, I think that was the last one I went to. And before that, it's Red Rocks. Who did we see? Oh, this is horrible that I cannot remember their names. It's this, oh my God. I hate it when I have that memory thing. Anyway, it was a comic duo who do, no, not Flight of the Conchords. Flight of the Conchords. And that was a while back. I don't get out to concerts much. That's why it took me a while to remember that. They were amazing. The Flying Conchords were hilarious. And we saw them at Red Rock. And I think that was the last one. Yeah. It's a while back. But the tribute band one was the last one. Okay, Rebecca, do you think extreme power fundamentally changes your ethics? I think it can. I think the social situation you find yourself in because of extreme power is what starts changing your ethics. Because let's take a look at this for a second. Not everybody who gets power or rises to positions of power takes advantage of it. But when you're in a social situation, when rising up the ladder, so to speak, where the people around you enable and encourage you to abuse your power or use it for unethical or irrational means, right, or ways, I think that's what starts changing your ethics. Because I think our morals are heavily, I'm not going to say determined, but influenced by who we're around and who we listen to, who our idea of authority is, who we believe knows what they're talking about. And if you're in a position here on a social ladder or an economic ladder, and you gain power or money or resources, you're going to be moving up that chain, right? And you're going to be surrounded by new people, different people than who were with you before. The caste system, the class system, the social system you're in, it's going to change. You're going to be hanging around different people, and they're going to want different things from you. And the needs and problems you're going to have to solve are going to change radically when you are given power. I'm relating a lot of it to money, because a lot of power on this planet has to do with money. But let's say you go to Congress. There we go. Let's say you become a congressman or woman. And now you're in a whole different system. Your life is different now. You're surrounded by different people. And the things that the levers they can move and the influence they have is very, very different from what you had before. And we look to our social circles for how do we act? How are we supposed to behave? What new rules am I supposed to be complying with? What are the manners and etiquette of this new system I'm in? And that informs us of how we're supposed to act. Oh, I'm supposed to dress this way now. I don't get to wear the Hawaiian shirts when I'm on the floor of Congress, right? I have to wear a suit and tie. I don't get to, drink my cherry Coke when I'm, sitting interviewing somebody in my congressional office. I have to have a glass of water or right? Or I have to have a glass of bourbon. What are the norms at this place? And that's what gets you reshaping your morality. Your emotional needs can change at that point. And of course, that'll very, very, very much change your thinking. Now, if your moral values or moral foundations are strong or solid for you, and you're not in a place where the crowd or the social circles around you are going to influence your moral foundations, you have them clear in your head. You know what's right and wrong and good and bad, and you're not going to budge on that. This is what we use the word integrity to describe. And if you have integrity, then you'll hold on to your moral foundations, or try to hold on to your moral foundations, no matter what social circle you're in, or what social or class system you rise or fall to. Works both ways. Right? So if you have integrity and you can maintain that, you stay integrated, right? Integrity. I love breaking down words like that sometimes. It's always fun. And as X-Scion here says, right? With extreme power comes extreme responsibility. If you recognize that, if you hold on to that or see that is a true thing, right? With great power comes great responsibility. I mean, why do you think that's in our fairy tales? Why is that statement such a powerful, reverberating statement through time? Right? With great power comes great responsibility, because we want people to keep their integrity no matter what changes around them. But we know from human psychology studies, we know without any question at all, no matter what culture you're in the modern world, no matter what culture you're in, no matter what language you speak, no matter where in the world you're located, roughly 60 to 70, 75% of people will alter reality to conform with what the group is saying around them. It's called the Asch conformity experiments. You can look this up. It's one of the most heavily replicated experiments in social sciences. And it's been done all over the world in lots of different various ways. Will people say that a line that is longer than another line isn't longer than another line if the people around them are all saying it's not? 60 to 70, 75% of people will go with what the group says, even when their own eyes are telling them differently from what the group says. It's in us to do that. It's not a moral failing so much as a biological kind of push that we have, because we're tribal, we're mammals, right? We are built to be that way, to go with what the group says. And it takes strong moral certainty and integrity to overcome that tribalistic social, instinct in us to go with what the group tells us. It takes a great force of will to be able to overcome that for some people. So that's what I think of when you ask me this question, right? Is at the end of the day, from an outside look, you go, yeah, this guy got all this power, and look, now he's an asshole. Absolutely. I just wanted to go a little deeper as to why the change. It is absolutely true that extreme power changes people. Yeah, definitely does. But it's not the power that changes them. It's all this other stuff I'm talking about that I think is actually the source of the change. Because like I said, some people can get tons of power, tons of money, still lead decent, moral, ethical lives, Thanks for asking that. It's an interesting question. I like questions like that. I hope that answer was useful in some fashion. All right. Yeah, it's a choice, Tira says. Yeah, you got to think. You got to think hard about that stuff when you're in situations like that. Like I said, it takes a great force of will. All right, X sign. I really like the REM model you brought forward Saturday. Thank you. I like the path you're going. Thank you. Me too. Have you thought about writing a book about REM and all what you've learned over the years? Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. That's that cult recovery book that I'm writing, is about trying to put all those things down into a chapter by chapter breakdown for people so they can learn and know some of the same stuff I've learned over the years about cult recovery and getting over it. And yeah, the REM model is definitely going in there now. I hadn't planned on putting it in there before. There are chapters on critical thinking, emotional intelligence, morality, but I am going to put a chapter in there, kind of putting it all together. So yeah, that's definitely in there. And it very well could be, there could easily be a book dedicated to that model. And I'm sure if I'm going to pursue this, which I am, then I'm going to have to write that book at some point. So I want to get the cult recovery one done first, for obvious reasons. I think unfortunately, you get hyper-focused for a while, and I got like 5 chapters done, and then haven't worked on it in a couple months. So I gotta get back to it. There are also the potential, I think, of maybe workshops or something around it, something like that. To present it to people in a helpful way, right? So we're not trying to introduce them to some new 12-step program or some bullshit. Just, hey, look, here's the data on this. Here's how to, how would this work in your life, right? Kind of thing. That's kind of what I can think of right now. Okay. Xsign also asks, I hope that one day we get to talk about all the amazing things that are happening rather than the shitty things that are going on. Do you think we'll get there? Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things I try to do to sort of timeline cleanse, as they say on my social media, and in my head, is there are videos and news and information resources out there to learn all kinds of amazing good stuff that's going on in the world, because there is a lot of really good stuff going on in the world. There are technological innovations, social innovations, and activities that are being done in food management or resource management or technological advances to grow more, to provide more power to people, to assist people in their lives. You know, this is one of the things I'm so excited about with the Aftermath Foundation podcast that's coming out today is, you know, that's going to be like good news about the Aftermath Foundation and what we do there. I say we because I'm not on the board and I don't volunteer. I do contract work for them, right? But I'm part of it, and I'm very, very proud to be. Very proud to be. So there's some places where you can get some good news that I would encourage you, very, very much encourage you out there to go look at. You know, I go on Blue Sky pretty daily. I go on Reddit, you know, every now and again. And it's, you know, it's a lot of complaining. You're right. It's a lot of carping and snark and you know, we don't really need a lot of that in our lives. You know, I would encourage, and in fact, also in answer to this, let me just say, I was talking to my wife about this just the other day. Let me say this. Let me throw this out there. We're not built for the society we've created. I'm far from an original thinker on that. This is not, you know, I came up with this one day. There have been a lot of people saying this over time. Our brains, our social networks, what we're capable of remembering, what we're capable of doing, what our body is built for, isn't this. Right? We live vicariously and virtually through other people and other things more than a lot of us are living life itself in our vicinity. We spend time on TV, on the internet, rather than in the real world. Our bodies are built to live in the real world. And just because we've invented technology doesn't mean it's good for us. And I don't mean all technology. I'm not trying to be a Luddite. But I am saying that, you know, certainly within my lifetime, things have gotten completely out of hand. And we're exposed to far, far, far more information than we were biologically, evolutionarily designed to deal with. We are overloaded with it. And our whole entertainment structure and system is dominating our lives rather than being a slice of our life. As economics has, you know, as the economic disparity has increased, entertainment is starting to take a dive. You may notice even good movies these days just don't do well. People aren't going to the movies. They can't afford to. They're overloaded. I think these are the main reasons for that, right? Not because the quality of movies has universally gone down. It hasn't. Some, you know, corporate, you know what I think about Disney and that kind of crap. But even there, you get an Andor. You get good quality stuff seeping through all over the place. So, but it doesn't do as well as maybe it would have used to because we're overloaded. And I say all of this not in a ranty, you know, way. I'm trying to point it out because I think if we can recognize that, we can pull our flippers back in a little bit as individuals and realize that our going and talking, as I've said so many times, going and talking to your neighbors, connecting with your family, building friend networks that you spend more time with than you do with the virtual world. How many of us have that all out of whack? in our lives, where we're spending hours and hours online and very little time with each other. And actively now, it's so bad. This is when I realized how bad it was. It's so bad now that people get pissed at you if you just call them without clearing it with them and scheduling them with it first. Or showing, you remember how it, I mean, I don't know if all of you remember this, but you know, this isn't just some good old days kind of thing. I'm trying to talk about, you know, what we are as creatures, as a species. We are built to have social interaction in the real world, not Zuckerberg's bullshit that he's laid all over the world for the last 30 years, 20 years, right? That's not natural for us, and it's not good for us. So I think, you know, if you want to talk about good things, amazing things, get with people in the real world is where all this goes. You know, I mean, just, you know, go out to dinner with your friends, go to the park, you know, with your wife or your kids or your husband or whatever, your spouse, right? Just take walks every day. I mean, get out in the world and appreciate the physical world, not the virtual one. Rebalance that. I'm trying to do that, even though I'm a content creator, so I end up spending a lot of my time at my computer and online. I'm working to, you know, make my life more of what I'm talking about right now, right? And I would encourage you to do the same, because I think that will help our spirits, help our emotional center. You know, our social need, our need for sociality or social networks isn't really satisfied online. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a decline in mental health. My take. All right. Young Matador. From your experience, did you ever witness or hear about Scientology having run-ins with the mafia or organized crime? Ooh. I want to make sure I got a lot of years to run through here. Let me see. I'm thinking of times when actual criminals or actual criminal behavior was brought into the church. And I did witness that a couple times. But organized crime or mafia, straining right now to remember anything like that. I mean, you know, there was a guy I knew who was back in the day, back in the 80s, I met this guy who had been around a few blocks. You know what I mean? He'd lived some life, and he knew some people, and he talked a little bit about having mafia connections or having met people, right, who were like in the mafia and stuff. But that's as close as I can remember right now as to those things, those worlds coming together. Yeah. A6222 says Nibs said Hubbard flew in coke for the cartels. I think Nibs is full of shit. That's what I think. But, you know, prove it. I mean, you can say stuff like that, but prove it. Show me where, how. You know, give me some evidence. Otherwise, shut up. Because Nibs said a lot of things, you know. And I'm not saying everything Nibs said was wrong. I'm not trying to say that. But when you're going to make, you know, it's kind of Sagan, right? Extreme claims require extreme evidence. Yeah. I just can't think of any direct connections between organized crime and Scientology that I saw with my own two eyes. I just... Criminals, yes. More than once. Scientologists who engaged in criminal behavior. Yep, more than once. But as far as, I mean, I guess one thing I can say is, as far as Scientology having run-ins with organized crime, I mean, Scientology is organized crime. So there's that. Okay. Yeah. I know the social media. I'm just looking at a couple of the comments here. I know social media has utility, but I'll tell you what, I got off Facebook and I haven't missed it once. Not once. Angry Chode. All right. Oh, we got a Chode medley, I think. Do you think the economy is headed in a good direction? What does Chris think about that? Do you like the 1980s films? If so, which ones? Oh, hell yes, I do. What is your opinion of Creed and Nickelback? And what do you think of others who like those bands? Okay, great. That's a fun one. I'm not going to pontificate too long. Y'all have already heard me pontificate about the economy, right? Economic disparity is a very, very real thing. Gary Stevenson over in the UK talks a very, very, very good talk about taxing the billionaires and the fact that right now, what he said something I'll repeat here because I think it's interesting and true. I think it's true, which is that he said that right now, word on the street, right? People generally understand that economic disparity is really impacting their lives in a very significant way. In other words, the amount of value and resources and money that have flown to the top of the food chain in the UK, in the United States, and in a lot of European countries, and in certainly Russia, China. We can look at these extreme places. And what are we looking at? We're looking at all the value and assets and resources are at the top, and it's top heavy. And classically, this is exactly the tipping point when societies turn over, when that sort of the cycles of history cycle, right? Which pushes things over the edge, and unfortunately into a kind of dissolving and a sort of dissolution, because people just get sick and tired of not having the value of their work. They go to work every day, they work their asses off, and they don't get what they feel they deserve for that. They watch other people who seemingly do no work or very little work profit from that, and they get sick and tired of it. And so then the systems tend to collapse when they get too top heavy like that. So Gary's been talking about the fact that people are kind of hyper aware of this, or more aware of it now than they ever have been. And this is what they talk about is, hey, we need to tax the billionaires. We need these people to start throwing some of that value back down the line to the people who push them up. But the billionaire class lives in its own moral place, right? In its own sphere. It's, as I call it, the rarefied air of society. Where they don't, not only do they not listen to or, pay any attention to the lower classes below them, they don't care. And the world that they live in enables that way of thinking. You don't, and this is, think French aristocracy right before the French Revolution, right? Let them eat cake. This whole attitude, this is not new with billionaires 2025. This is human beings who let money and power and resources go to their head multi-generationally. They start feeling entitled, and that they somehow deserve this in the same way that, the divine right of kings told those guys, from the moment they were born, you deserve this. You're a better class of human being than the rabble, this kind of thing. So this is the situation we live in right now. And so that's why, in terms of, is the economy headed in a good direction? No, it's not. And we could potentially turn it around in a nonviolent way. I'd love to see that. but historically speaking, that hasn't been the pattern that we followed as a species. So, so Gary talks about the fact that people are aware of that and want to tax the billionaires and want them to pay their fair share and want to bring balance back to that. But because our systems are so top heavy with politicians and enablers and lobbyists and billionaires and, this rarefied air, these upper classes, they want to maintain their position. And again, they feel justified and deserving, and this is mine and you don't get any. It's a very, 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 very selfish place to live. So their whole effort one of the things they do with their money and their resources is they invest it in PR firms and propaganda campaigns and social media companies. They don't just do a campaign. They buy Twitter, and they go to town. And we got bots and all kinds of things now. We have things that propaganda techniques and technologies that are weapons of mass destruction, and they use that to distract and push other populist post-truth agendas. It wasn't Donald Trump who strategically, tactically figured out how to rise to power. He didn't expect to get elected. He thought he was going to lose to Hillary. But populism and the post-truth environment were shaped by economic and social forces just as much as they were by Trump taking advantage of them. So that's kind of why I think our economy is not headed in a good direction. That's my more complete answer to you on that. I'd love to see that turn around, and I hope it does. Do you like 80s films? If so, which ones? Yes, I do. I love 80s films. I was raised on 80s films, so of course I do. Let's see, all the George Lucas, all the Steven Spielberg, all the James Cameron. Aliens, Back to the Future trilogy, of course the Star Wars movies. Let's see, the action movies of the 80s. I'll admit it, I was there. I'm not a huge fan now, but I sure as hell was in the 80s. Rambo and oh my God, probably one of the worst action movies ever made by a top star was Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Oh my God. I will never get out of my, you just can't unsee it once you see it. Schwarzenegger in a Speedo, right? With a rocket launch. It's just like, what am I looking at right now? So the 80s definitely was a time of excess. One of the other things that was so fun and goofy about the 80s was some of the low budget stuff. I'm gonna throw a title out at you guys. You tell me which of you guys might remember this one. Sword and the Sorcerer, Hawk the Slayer, Beastmaster. Right? These sort of sword and sandals, Dungeons and Dragons, beasts and broads kind of movies, right? These 80s, these low budget 80s movies. Lived for those, loved those, right? Conan the Barbarian, that was not low budget. That one was pretty killer. So I'm all about those 80s. I'm all about those 80s movies. And of course, all the John Hughes movies. That was 80s, from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Pretty in Pink. Oh God, what was the one in the, oh my gosh. So all the John Hughes movies. They were all so good. I don't remember if Home Alone was 80s or early 90s, but the teen ones that he did were, they were brilliant. They spoke to us. They did. They did. They might not speak to people now. I don't know, but they sure did then. Kroll, yes, Kroll. Oh my God, yes, Kroll. Those were great. So yeah, so I was all about the 80s films. Yeah, I love 80s films. I'll go back to some of those sometimes. And I don't ruin my childhood too much because it was already ruined. It's fine. I can go back and watch that stuff. That's just a small sampling. I'm sure I'm forgetting swaths of stuff because the 80s was rich in entertainment. Oh, and that's just the movies. I mean, if we go into, you know, I mean, there's Scorsese stuff too from the 80s. I mean, Raging Bull was the 80s. Was Goodfellas 80s or 90s? Now I'm curious. I'm just gonna check real fast. I think it was 90s. Pretty sure it was 90s. Goodfellas. 1990. Okay, 1990. Yeah. I mean, Scorsese was just putting out. I mean, Color Money. There's a Tom Cruise movie that I actually, Rain Man, another Tom Cruise movie from the 80s. I mean, these were good movies. They were. They just, arguably, they are good. Not because of Tom Cruise, just he's a part of a production. That's why they're good, because it's not all about Tom Cruise, right? Like, as opposed to, say, Top Gun. Oh my God, how am I even not mentioning the Raiders? I mean, I said Spielberg, but, the Indiana Jones, I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that was 81. Temple of Doom, not such a great follow-up. It's hard to like Temple of Doom. It's hard. I was so upset in the theater watching it. First showing, first day it was out. I was so upset by Temple of Doom, but it's hard to find a better movie in my estimation than Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's just cinematic perfection, Oh, and the other one, let me share this with you guys real fast. I'm sure many of you have heard of this, but since I'm on a roll about 80s movies, Field of Dreams. Field of Dreams. Still, to this day, top of my list. Inspirational, aspirational, like dream-like fantasy that just, I absolutely lose my shit every time I see that movie. I haven't seen it a lot because I don't want to wear out the emotional journey of what that movie is for me. But Field of Dreams it's not about baseball. That movie is not about baseball. It is about dreams, and it is cinematic genius that movie got made and that it is what it is. I love that movie. There are arguably better movies in some ways, but I don't know, man. Field of Dreams just hit me. E.T. I mean, that was 80s. Oh, yeah. Okay. Enough about that. I could go on and on and on. What is your opinion of Creed and Nickelback? I don't mind them. There's a couple Nickelback songs. I can't even name any that I don't mind listening to, I guess, if it comes on the radio. I never had Nickelback hate, and I don't have Creed hate. I was a little, oh, really? When I found out, that the lead singer is like this hardcore Christian guy. He's got this really deep voice, Creed. It's not particularly my jam. I don't have any of their music saved anywhere. They're not on my playlists. What do I think of others who like those bands? Live and let live. I don't hate on Creed and Nickelback the same way I do Tom Cruise. All right, A66222. What do you think Nibs said was true or false? Following up on that. John Atack says he hardly believes Nibs on things he says he personally saw or was involved in. John Atack says he only believes Nibs on things he says. Yep, I agree. That's kind of what I take Nibs for also. Nibs is the one who said that L. Ron Hubbard read the Book of the Law, which is Aleister Crowley's work, when he was 16 years old. Nibs said that Hubbard was first introduced to Crowley when he was 16. I believe that is true, or could be true. It sounds plausible to me, and I used it as a point of my presentation on Hubbard. I believe Nibs when he said, and I think it was the Penthouse interview, he talked about how in the 50s he would go and blackmail students to stay on course with their secrets that they had divulged in auditing, or he would strong arm them and literally beat people up and bring them back in to do Scientology stuff. I believe him when he says he did those things. That was actually even made it into the movie The Master, when the Freddie Quill character is, going and beating up on people and stuff. That's straight out of Nibs' testimonials, right, or discussions. But beyond that stuff, when he says Hubbard was satanic, we know now, no, he wasn't. Not exactly. Not the way Christians think of satanic. Hubbard had a whole other thing going on. He doesn't believe in hell. Hubbard's not about, God, Satan, and cast down into the lake of fire, and Satan's down there, and Hubbard worships that. That's not who Hubbard is or was about. So when Nibs presents Hubbard as satanic, I go, no, that's not what he was. So that's kind of where I run into some, disagreements with him in my interpretation of Hubbard's writings and beliefs. I don't find Nibs to be ringing true on that. I wonder if Nibs himself just misunderstood, where Hubbard was coming from on that black magic stuff. I mean, let's admit, it's weird. And if Hubbard sat down and explained it to you, or was talking to you about it while you were around him, you can imagine the spin and weirdness that Hubbard's going to feed you, right? So, so I'm not saying Nibs is making stuff up when he talks about, Hubbard that way. I just think that's how he understood his father. He was certainly fair gamed. No question about that. And he suffered greatly as a result. But when he said, what really threw me about Nibs, the thing that really, really made me go, oh man, what is up with this guy, is at the end of the Penthouse interview, when he's asked, would you do it again? Or do you have any regrets about any of that? And he says, yeah, I'd do it again. No, I don't. I mean, basically, unapologetic, unremorseful about all the things he laid out that he did. I didn't see remorse or, any kind of regret in his statements on that. And he overtly said he didn't have regret about those things. So that's where I kind of went, oh man, this guy is a little bit of a chip off the old block, and that sucks. That sucks for Nibs. But he was who he was. Can't change who you are any more than Hubbard could, as we went over. Hubbard was locked in. Hubbard had no other path his life was going to take than the one it took. Hubbard was not a moral person the way you and I think about. He didn't have the same moral foundations we did. Whether the moral foundations Hubbard was operating on were really different. And so were Nibs. And so truth becomes malleable, to such people. In addition to the problems you're plagued with any person, which is, misremembering things and being given bad information and then passing it on because they don't know any better. I mean, both of those are true things too. Okay, let's carry on here. These are fun questions. X-Cyan, if someone were to give you $10 million, what would you do with it? Oh, man. Well, obviously pay all my debts. Obviously hire trustworthy accountant, lawyer, and investor. Do research, find 3 people that I could actually trust to do those jobs and pay them, a fair amount of money to invest my money, protect my money, and make sure that I have legal cover, right? So that people can't come and take my money. And then I would use the bulk of it, because that would be far from most of the money. I would use the bulk of it to secure my life, secure my future for me and my wife and my family. And then I would work on what I do now. But I would have money to invest to build something. I don't know that I would do a brick and mortar or like a foundation or something, or perhaps get more involved with building the aftermath or something like it, not compete with the aftermath, because I don't want to do anything like that. But I would like to see it be able to offer more, but not just for ex-Scientologists. It's 10 million is not enough to do, you know, every cult aftermath foundation style, right? But there have been efforts in the past, successful ones, to set up places where people could come out of a cult situation or a coercive situation and get some help and some therapy and some recovery, right? Such things, there was a place called LifeSpring. There have been other places that people have tried to put together. It's hard to have a brick and mortar place, in other words, a real world place, because the cults come after you. If you settle in someplace, they know where you are and they come after you. And so you kind of have to go out somewhere where they can't get you, right? That kind of thing. I don't know that I'm keen to set up an operation like that, but and it's also hard to sustain. It's hard. You have to think in long term, and long term those things tend to fold because there's not lots of money, and they're not money making operations when you're helping people, as we've gone over on this channel. You know, there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. There's endless streams of money for pseudoscientific bullshit. And there's very, very little money to help people recover from the pseudoscientific bullshit, from the cults, from the MLMs, from the domestic violence. So there's more money in that zone of domestic violence care and shelters and foundations and help for battered women and kids. And there is a lot of money by governments put into that. And some private money goes in that direction too. But when it comes to the ex-cult space, you know, not much, right? And the aftermath has managed to, because Claire Headley is such a fucking genius, and the board has been sensible enough to run an operation as a nonprofit that has managed to keep it going without lots and lots and lots of money thrown at them. Certainly not $10 million, right? You know, you need organizational genius to run something like that well. And the people, you know, who have been running the aftermath, you know, you got to know, you guys have got to know that all the crap that is said about the aftermath online, you know, by its ex-Scientologist detractors, I'll just put it that way, is total and complete horseshit. It's just not true, right? It's just not. The aftermath is an incredible institution. My take, right? So I think it's, you know, I'm not the guy who could run an operation like that, but I'd be happy to, you know, work on organizing, staffing, working with, building up something that is working or growing, and reinforce that, you know. And that's my life. That's what I do. So if you gave me a bunch of money, I would just kind of invest in that direction. And I'd probably have some nicer Hawaiian shirts. Huh? You know, obviously I'd get a house, you know, stuff like that. I would definitely secure my own future as well. Not lavishly, because I'm not interested in being in the rarefied air of the society. I don't want to ascend to billionaire status. Fuck those guys. Who wants to be a billionaire? Not me. I don't want any part of that bullshit, you know, because it does fuck with you, and you end up in a social world of people who are really awful because they have way too much. Again, like we have too much social media in our lives, they got too much money in theirs, and it's and when it's multi-generational, you know, you're fucked from the time you're born into a family like that. I wouldn't wish that off on anybody. So, Nibs is L. Ron Hubbard Jr. Nibs, sorry about that, Jay. Nibs is one of Hubbard's children, and the one who went to L. Ron Hubbard in 1951 and 1951-52 time period. He went and started working with his father in Phoenix, Arizona, when Hubbard was down there, and stuck with him through 1960 when he took off with some other people, and then Hubbard basically started a campaign of fair gaming his own son. And that's where security checking comes from, by the way. That's when it was invented. Okay, Michael Yoder. Chris, what do you think about the 51st state Canada thing and the Canadian worldwide boycotts of the U.S. and U.S. products? Yeah, this is got to be the single stupidest bit of foreign policy nonsense and trade negotiation nonsense that I have ever seen. I mean, who could imagine somebody so catastrophically stupid as to alienate Canada? Canadians are awesome. Canada has been one of our strongest partners since what, World War II, before? And in one presidential term, all of that is being pissed away. It infuriates me, to be honest with you, in terms of what I think about it. I think it's disgusting. I think our president is insane to do that. And he's backed by economic advisors and trade advisors who have their heads so far up their fucking asses that they would burn the entire barn to the ground out of spite and watch everything just fall apart and tell themselves they're doing the righteous good job, right? That seems to be what's going on right now in our economic and trade world right now. You know, I'm not saying we had a perfect world before Trump. We did not, right? We've had decades of nonsense, but we've had decades of nonsense because of short-term thinking. And we had we built a world that could have been nice things for everybody. And it's a real shame to me that psychologically and socially speaking, group psychology wise, we as a species can't seem to maintain nice things. I'm not trying to be a doomer and I say stuff like that, or some kind of pessimist. I'm trying to be real about our psychology in groups. And that tribalism thing and that need that we have for conflict drives these kinds of things that we're seeing right now, where Canada is, having its buttons pushed and by the big orange wrecking ball, and these boycotts and trade moves, the tariffs, this kind of stuff. It's all anchored in such deep levels of outright stupidity that it's hard for people to get their head around that, because we're not used to and we don't think about things happening on the world stage because of stupidity. People always think there's some master plan and somebody's playing 4D chess, and they're not. It's not that way at all. It's very impulsive and aggressive and short-sighted thinking that lands us where we're at now. It's not 4D chess. Nobody imagined, oh, I know what to do, right? You have influencers like Putin who wants to create democratic unrest and dissolution and has been working very hard to do that. But Putin can't accomplish that all by himself, right? He needs the rise of things like post-truth populism and economic disparity, right? Which is not Putin's product. It's the product of billionaires and economists and government short-sighted, greedy officials who go to Congress to be personally enriched, not serve people. You know, it's a collection of things. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And the Canadian conflict that we're experiencing right now as a trade partner and as a domestic partner is an outgrowth of that. It's a consequence of it. It's just one of many, right? We have the same bullshit going on with Mexico and with Europe right now. And, you know, Trump is just all about self-aggrandizement, and he doesn't care how he gets it. It doesn't matter to him. He doesn't think about things like, oh, I'm going to do these tariffs, and in 2 years, everybody's going to be suffering economically. That calculus isn't in his headspace. It's not how he thinks. You bend the knee to me right now. You demonstrate loyalty to me in this moment, or I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to, you know, implement pain in your direction because you're not doing or saying or groveling to my satisfaction. That's how Trump thinks. And it's very moment to moment, the way he thinks. It's not long term. And the people around him, Peter Navarro, for example, this Lutnick guy, these guys are idiots. They're economic idiots. That's why we get what we get. Okay, enough about that. Okay, good. Let me just check here, because I know we're going to be almost to the end. Joe Grease, Spaceballs by Mel Brooks. Yeah, absolutely. Love Spaceballs. Okay, here we go. There were a couple other questions. Asex222. Don't you think it's how interesting how evil Hubbard became, even though his childhood was totally fine and his parents were normal? Well, yeah, because he wasn't. And I don't know how normal his parents were, but his dad was pretty absent. And because he was, you know, off in the Navy doing his Navy stuff, as I understand it. And that's a factor. And, you know, and I think you're right. I don't think that they were abnormal in dealing with him. But remember, Hubbard, from a very early age, I believe now, I'd have to see his journals, and I wish I had access to them. It would be very enlightening. You know, his diaries and stuff. But I believe at this point that it was sometime in his childhood that Hubbard probably started seeing his guardian spirit, or imagining that such a thing existed, and was talking to him and stuff like that. And I don't know if he got hit on the head. I don't know if it was some genetic deformity, or if, you know, because you don't get trained into seeing a hallucinatory, auditory, you know, audio and visual hallucination. You don't, it's hard. It would be really hard to indoctrinate somebody into something like that. I don't even know how you know, go about it. But if you had malfunctions going on up here, or deficiencies, or issues, or ego issues, or, you know, internal conflicts, and perhaps, you know, TLE, temporal lobe epilepsy, that we believe he suffered from, could be the result of a physical injury or accident, right? And that might not have been the only point of brain damage Hubbard suffered from. You know, maybe he got hit in the head some other way too. However it happened, Hubbard's childhood seems to have been socially dysfunctional, very, very imaginative, very, very hyper imaginative, and very fantastical, right? He seemed to think and, you know, manifest, like the pathological lying I'm referring to here, right? Like the exaggerations about reality seem to be something that lived in him from early on. And I'm not saying he was insane. I'm just saying he had such a wildly different view of the world. And and as he got older, he probably realized more and more how dysfunctional that was, right? And so, kind of closes himself off from other people or starts thinking negatively about other people. Right? And they're idiots and I'm the smart one kind of approach. I think. That's my conjecture about his early life. And how he ended up the way that he ended up is I think that TLE thing was bugging him early on, at least the hallucination stuff. Okay. Okay, Priestley Scribe, your short revealed 3 levels that members navigate by. Yeah. What if a cult threw away both the moral and intellectual levels? Would that not be a super cult? Okay, one second. You can't. You can't throw away the immoral and intellectual levels. Maybe I'm misunderstanding where you're coming from, but you can't. They're part of who we are. It's what makes humans humans. That we have those layers. The idea is not just this is how cults operate. This is just what cults influence or manipulate. Everybody is running from these 3 levels, right? This REM stack, as I put it. So you can't get rid of them or throw them away. And it wouldn't be a super cult, it would be a non-entity, because if you just operated at the level of intellect or rationality, that's what critical thinkers try to do, right? You'd kind of be a Mr. Spock kind of guy, where we're going to eschew emotion. But even Mr. Spock, right, has very rigid and very set morality. I mean, right and wrong, good and bad is very clearly defined in his headspace. And we all have that. There's not a single human being anywhere, who doesn't have some concept of good and bad, right and wrong, and operate from it, judge themselves and judge others accordingly. So I don't know how you throw those away, as you've worded it in this question. So I'm either not understanding what you're asking me, or I'm saying it's impossible to do that. Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to have to wrap up in a minute. If you have anything else you want to throw in, I'm at the end of the queue, so now would be the time. Otherwise, I'm going to not forget. Because I don't highlight critical thinking enough. We used to talk about this stuff all the time. I never forgot to give you my critical thinking cards at the end, and I really, really, really want to make sure I get that back in, because critical thinking is a key component of living a better life for yourself, and navigating your way through the bullshit that's presented to us on a daily, on social media and otherwise. On the beach watching. Awesome. Okay, so today's bias is called anchoring. The first thing you judge influences your judgment of all that follows. Okay. Human minds are associative in nature. Very true. So the order in which we receive information helps determine the course of our judgments and perceptions. Very true. Be especially mindful of this bias during negotiations. So this is called anchoring. We all know about first impressions, right? It comes out of the same concept. And it's because the first thing you're given is the standard or measure by which the second, third, and fourth thing are going to be compared. So your first in line is very important in terms of your choices when you're presenting choices to people, by the way, right? If you read Cialdini's Influence, he talks about this, that, that the first thing you present to somebody is probably going to be the thing they're going to choose. Statistically speaking, I believe that he wrote that is true. Oh, that's interesting, priestly scribe. Okay, there's a little bit more coming in on this, where he says here, or she, I'm not sure, priestly scribe, about that. But the Lord's Recovery Group, my 35-year cult, demonized any consideration of right and wrong. That's fascinating to me. The Lord's Recovery Group demonized any consideration of right and wrong. So therefore, it would be wrong to have thoughts about right and wrong. I'm not trying to give you gotchas, but I'm just not trying to demonstrate that point, that there's always right and wrong. Any group is defined by guardrails. Otherwise, it's not a group, is it? Right? Membership always has characteristics, beliefs, systems of navigating social dynamics. And these are the rules and the guidelines and the morals, if you will, of any group. So even the idea that we're not going to have good and bad, okay, really? I'd love to know more about that. And feel free to email me, because I'd be curious as to how your group, the Lord's Recovery, specifically did this demonization. I'm very curious about that, because you can't, and no cult can exist without rigid ideas of good and bad and right and wrong, because it's from that comes the us versus them. You can't have an us and a them if you don't have a clear line in the sand that differentiates us from them. Even if it's, well, we're us because we wear a blue shirt, and they're them because none of them wear a blue shirt. If you wear a blue shirt, you're one of us. There's a line in the sand. There's a right versus wrong. We're right because we wear a blue shirt. They're wrong because they don't. That's the literal anatomy of us versus them. So that's why I struggle to think that you can do that. But I get what you're saying, that that one of the group's dogmatic points was we're not going to talk about right and wrong somehow. And like I said, I'm very curious how that was done or presented to you. So please, if you'd be down, write me an email. AskChrisShelton@gmail.com is my email address that anybody can get to. And let me know more about that and your group and your experience with it. I'd love to know more. Okay, I got to go because the aftermath thing is about to start. You all got to get over there, and we're going to wrap up. Thanks very much for coming around, you guys. It was fun. I'll see you guys next week. And you should get a show from me and Tony tomorrow. I haven't confirmed it with him yet, but as far as I know, we're going to be good to go. So I'll see y'all tomorrow one way or the other, and bye-bye now.